so let's begin. I'm Elizabeth Henry. I'm the president of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. ELM is a 121-year-old environmental advocacy organization based on Beacon Hill. We've been advocating for Massachusetts to lead the nation in responsible environmental policy since 1898. We have long been a convener on environmental issues, and we are proud to continue this tradition in a new digital way. I'm really thrilled to welcome our over 300 registrants joining us from across the Commonwealth here on Zoom and streaming this on Facebook Live. Welcome to the 6th edition of ELM's weekly webinar series, the 6th of 10 sessions, which will run through June 10th. Together, over the last 6 weeks, we've explored this intersection of public policy and the two crises of COVID-19 and climate change. We've learned about the profound interconnections between climate and human health, how the most vulnerable among us are bearing the brunt of those impacts, how federal policymakers are approaching a stimulus, how the coverage of climate change in the media is shaping the imperative for action, and how youth climate activists are adapting to this new normal. Next week, we'll discuss the future of transportation post-COVID-19 with Monica Tibbetts-Nutt. Monica sits on the board of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, or MassDOT, and she's the vice chair of the MBTA's Fiscal Management and Control Board, and she's the executive director of the 128 Business Council. Today, however, we are so thrilled to have Attorney General Maura Healey and her Energy and Environment Bureau Chief, Melissa Hoffer. They'll be discussing their efforts to challenge environmental rollbacks and protect human health. So for the next hour, you can expect about 15 minutes of remarks from Attorney General Maura Healey, 20 minutes of discussion with questions from the ELM team and those submitted in advance from registrants. And Melissa Hoffer will join us for this portion of the conversation. The last 20 minutes will be live Q&A from you, the audience. So below, you can click on that Q&A button to submit a question anytime throughout the webinar, and you can upvote those questions that you like. The team and I will consolidate the topics, and Attorney General Healey and Melissa will respond. As I mentioned, this event is being broadcast on Facebook Live, and we're recording these sessions. This video will be available on ELM's YouTube page, so you can share it beyond those who were able to attend now. We are so privileged to have Attorney General Healey with us today. Sworn into office in January 2015, Attorney General Healey has made supporting clean and renewable energy and controlling ratepayer costs a top priority for her office. She's also been a leader in fighting the federal government's attempts to roll back critical environmental protections. And she's been responding forcefully to the federal government's decision to suspend EPA enforcement during the COVID-19 pandemic. Melissa Hoffer serves as the chief of the AG's Energy and Environment Bureau. Her division enforces state and federal environmental protections and advocates for ratepayers, for you, Massachusetts consumers, in state and federal proceedings, ensuring that we all have access to reliable and affordable energy. So welcome, Attorney General.
Hey, good morning, Elizabeth. And great to be with my colleague, Melissa Hoffer, and with all of you. I really appreciate all that the Environmental League of Massachusetts has done, is doing, and certainly will do as we move forward. So I'll tell you at the outset a little bit from where I sit. Every morning I begin my day with a call with the governor and the CEOs of the hospitals. And we've been doing this for several weeks now, watching the numbers and rates of infection. As you probably know, Massachusetts is 4th nationally in infection rates and 3rd nationally in deaths, which are over 5,000. And this is something that is going to be with us for some time to come. What this has also been about is revealing, I think, some of the disparities that have existed for a long time, but maybe didn't get the attention that they were due. And yesterday we released an environmental justice brief that Melissa Hoffer and Dave Wittenberg from our office authored, using data that we pulled from cities and towns that mapped COVID rates to communities. And not surprisingly, we saw that communities with poor environmental justice, I should say, communities with real environmental injustice, where there is greater air pollution, more siting of polluting factories and facilities, places like Chelsea, Lynn, Lawrence, Brockton, these are places that have correspondingly higher rates of COVID infection, pointing once again to the importance and the need of addressing the climate crisis, of recognizing the connection between the environment and humanity. And that's something that I've been trying to talk about and explaining why this brief is important and why we need to take this opportunity as we move forward in a shared commitment to address the climate crisis, lead our regions through a clean energy transformation, and make sure that while we do this, the federal government, and specifically the Trump administration, doesn't continue to take us backwards and ruin all the progress that we've made to date. So unfortunately, the Trump administration, as I say, has been using this pandemic to do all sorts of things. Exploit xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment, potentially find ways to foul up the election. And certainly in this space has used the pandemic to roll back a number of environmental protections that put public health at risk. The EPA even issued a policy saying that it wouldn't enforce certain federal laws anymore, essentially giving their friends in the fossil fuel industry a free pass during this time. Instead of more pollution and less accountability, we know that we need to focus hard with our resources on protecting the public and enforcing the laws. Our office recognizes that protecting public health by enforcing environmental laws has never been more important. Last month, researchers at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health issued a study linking the long-term exposure to fine particulate matter with increased COVID-19 death rates. And this only underscores the importance of continued enforcement of existing air pollution regulations to protect our human health during and after the COVID-19 crisis. And as I noted earlier, it is our vulnerable communities that are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. We've got a lot of work to do, and that includes continuing conversations like the one that we're engaging in today, moving forward with what we've recommended in terms of greater investments in clean energy jobs, strengthening the protections in our environmental justice communities, and stopping these rollbacks by the Trump administration. And I've been working hard with state AGs across the country on many of those efforts that you see us filing in court to stop these rollbacks, and that will continue. Since the beginning of 2017, my office has participated in or led nearly 175 separate legal actions challenging federal environmental rollbacks. I'm talking about lawsuits, comment letters, amicus briefs, but obviously that number is huge, 175 separate legal actions just since the start of the Trump administration. Now, the good news is that we're winning. With state AGs across the country, our office has been successful when it comes to implementing energy efficiency standards, regulating methane emissions, protecting workers and first responders from chemical explosions, preventing a bailout for the coal and nuclear power industry, controlling harmful ozone production, reducing greenhouse gases from cars and trucks, and finally restricting the use of ozone depleting chemicals. This isn't anything new for our office. You know, we've been in these fights for many years and well preceding both my time and Melissa's time in the office, but it's really, really important. And I'm incredibly grateful to Melissa and Rebecca Tepper and their team in the Bureau for the work that they've done. In fact, on the Clean Power Plan, on methane, on coal, on energy efficiency, we were defending these rules in court long before Donald Trump showed up. The difference now is that we used to have the Department of Justice on our side, and as you know, the Department of Justice has switched sides and is trying to now undo everything, teaming up with the lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry. So I can assure you that we're not going to stand by and let this happen, let this administration further endanger our planet and our residents, and we're going to continue to do everything we can as aggressively as we can to hold this administration accountable, and meanwhile do everything in our power to exercise the laws that are there to protect the environment and combat the climate crisis. And I take that really seriously in Massachusetts. You've heard me speak before about the role I think our state plays in terms of national leadership on so many different fronts, but particularly when it comes to this issue of the environment and our clean energy future. You and I know that whether you're a member of the Environmental League of Massachusetts or not, and certainly we encourage all to be, I think most Americans get that action is needed on climate. Action is needed now. And they support things like limiting carbon pollution, more efficient cars, healthier air quality, and lower electric bills. So that means that we're going to continue to not just challenge the administration, but we need to push for progress. And we need to push for progress right here in our own state, because states really are going to be the ones who will continue to lead for some time to come. We need to transform the way that we build and power our economy, how we move people and things, and how we build stuff. And I think with this pandemic, there's going to be building that happens across so many different fronts. And I hope this is an opportunity to build in a way that really accounts for what should have already been accounted for when it comes to climate and the environment, and also accounts for some of the injustices that we've seen baked into environmental regulation, baked into policy for far too long. We need to continue to see and ensure I should say, because we're not always seeing this, that everyone benefits from all of these efforts. So look, we know our job and our responsibility. We continue to be guided and informed by all of you. We continue to welcome and look for opportunities to partner together. I'm really grateful to all that Environmental League of Massachusetts has done and continues to do. As I talk and sit with people virtually, I should say these days, I think people really have a different understanding of what we have done to our environment. I live in Boston, and I think people are recognizing what it means to have less pollution with less cars on the road. And they think about now what that means as we move forward. And I hope that we move forward in a way that really takes account of that, where we do everything that we can to double down on addressing much needed action on climate and the environment, and take this opportunity to build a fairer, healthier, more just society as we do this. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Melissa, I would love to have you join us as well here. I'm struck by the number 175, Attorney General. That is impressive. And I commend you in your office.
Well, it's actually unfortunate, right? It's a shame that we have to seek legal process to stop bad things from happening. But the good news, Elizabeth, is that yes, we can and will continue to do that.
I'll also encourage everyone listening to read the report on COVID-19's unequal impacts. We dropped the link in the chat. It's very lucid and really heartbreaking. Probably not surprising, but really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Attorney General, I wanted to pick up on your comments about Trump's suspension of EPA enforcement. What does that actually mean in practice? And with little EPA enforcement for the foreseeable future, what are the most concerning environment and human health impacts that residents of the Commonwealth are now facing?
Yeah, I mean, this is devastating. Some of you know my dad used to be chief of water supply for Region 1 in the EPA. And, I certainly, in my time as Attorney General, and even before in the office, recognized the valued partner that EPA can be on so many fronts. So it's absolutely appalling to witness what has happened over the last 3 years, beginning with, I go back to the days of Scott Pruitt, a former Attorney General. It just kept getting worse and worse. And so what it's meant is that we have a lot more work to do. Not only has there been an abdication of responsibility, where the EPA is not enforcing laws that it should be enforcing, leaving more work to states, but there's also been an undermining of our responsibility and efforts to assert theories of preemption and to try to block us from doing our job, all in further service of the interests of fossil fuel industry. So that's what it's meant. And Melissa, I'd love to have you talk about what you think it's meant in terms of some of the actual work and work going ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things really. You know, one is that we have an affirmative agenda in the office where we're often trying, like that, for example, our report that came out on the unequal effects of COVID-19 yesterday. But the impact of the rollbacks is to really place us in a much more defensive posture in trying to retain, and these are very fundamental protections. So the push to roll back a lot of the Obama era efforts is certainly a critical aspect of it, but it's also a gutting of protections that have been in place since we were all in elementary school. And these are gutting of Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, really fundamental sort of achievements that were put in place at the time by, you know, bipartisan Congress who recognized the importance of a healthy environment for our economy, for our public health, for a host of reasons. So, you know, for our work, it means that, you know, because we're not the team, I think everyone knows that, that's going to give up the opportunities to pursue affirmative agenda as well. So we're doing it at the same time. But I think one framing point for all of this is to think a little bit about, you know, when the Trump administration came in very early in 2017, one of the very first things that they did was pass an executive order that was called Promoting Energy Independence and Economic Growth. And that executive order is really the first step to placing an obligation on EPA to go back and look at its regulations and decide if they've burdened the development or use of domestically produced energy resources. So that policy action was a, you know, it's hard to overstate the significance of it because it was a complete reset of United States energy and environment policy. So once that's in place, then they begin looking, and they begin looking at statutes, and they begin looking at some of these Obama era regulatory measures like regulating sources of methane from the oil and gas sector or the Clean Power Plan, or even things that are protecting us from hazardous air pollutants like the Mercury and Air Toxics Rule. And that becomes then the fulcrum for rolling back, or the argument for rolling back. So what you can probably see in that is there's a real tension because you've heard a lot of the rhetoric about, well, all we're doing is we're just trying to give the states more freedom to be able to regulate in the manner that's best for a particular state. That's really what we're doing. And if you sort of read the packaging that comes out around a lot of this stuff, that's sort of the message. But in effect, that's not what's happened because many of the regulatory measures have actually weakened states' ability to advance, for example, in Massachusetts, a clean energy agenda. So we'll talk some more about specific examples of that, but I think those are some broad themes because if you're trying to kind of make sense of what's happening or you're looking for some common threads that tie it all together, I think thinking back to the historical context of what they are doing and then why, and it's protective of a very certain industry, right? A lot of this ties back to a protection and a propping up of a fossil fuel industry that we all know it's time for us to be transitioning away from. I'll leave you with those sort of broad thoughts for now.
That's great. So Attorney General, a question about how you have an affirmative agenda for air quality protections.
I think that, yeah, no, look, it's really important. And my view is that we are there as an office to be the people's lawyer, and we should be making use of all avenues to advance public health and public good right now. And you know, that's just a general way we've operated in the office. We certainly understand we have a role to play when laws are challenged and we're defending them, or when our agencies get sued and we're providing that important defense. But you know, I really appreciate, you know, I joined the office in March of 2007, and at the time, Martha Coakley was Attorney General, and Jim Milkey was Chief of the Environmental Protection Division. And about 3 months later, 4 months later, in June of 2017, Mass versus EPA came down. And it was yet another affirmation of the important role that this office and state AGs have to play in protecting and advancing environmental prerogatives. And so, Melissa and the team, they basically take a look at the whole landscape, and there is not a more sophisticated, expert, and gung-ho team in the entire country, in any office of any size, than the team that we have in our Energy and Environmental Bureau. And they've done, incredibly innovative work on the ratepayer side, affirmatively pushing out reports and, talking about things like competitive energy supply, talking about sources of energy, where we need to go, trying to push, because sometimes we push by suing, sometimes we push by, issuing reports like the one we issued yesterday that, make policy recommendations. We certainly do a lot of work just enforcing environmental laws. That's why, you see us going after those who, rip apart our wetlands, who engage in illegal dumping in our rivers. We've done it in our team the last few years, undertook a special focused effort on asbestos that is not just like enforcing the law, but also engaging with school districts directly about, how to go about appropriate asbestos removal. Melissa, if you want to talk a little bit more about how you as the architect and overseer of the work of the Bureau when it comes to the affirmative agenda, how you prioritize, I think that'd be helpful for people to hear, because there's so much in this space.
Yeah, so I think as we have come in and we've looked at it, a top priority we had is really an administrative priority, and that was to make sure that we were really harmonizing the positions of the office. So when AG Healey created our Energy and Environment Bureau, that really allowed us to make sure and put a mandate in place for us to ensure that when we're taking positions on energy policy and environmental policy, we are speaking with one voice. So that's really, really important, because it's not always in place, in government. And it also creates an infrastructure for those divisions to be talking with each other, to be building relationships among people, to be working together on projects, so they get to know each other, they get to know each other's expertise, they get to build relationships, and they advance work together. And that has been, it's been extremely helpful. I'll give you an example. Right now, that Pilgrim's in the process of decommissioning, and we have a cross-teamed group working on that right now that draws on the expertise of our energy division and also on our environmental division. It's extremely helpful, because now we've got a team that can address the issues that are arising as we look at what that closure is going to take, and as we look to ensure that the state is not going to be facing a lack of financial assurance in the future for costs associated with management of the long-term spent fuel there. So that's just one example, but specifically, how do we prioritize things aside from putting those administrative mechanisms in place? I think the big issue that is facing all of us right now is climate change. So it's been a lens, I think, through which we focus on all of our work. We really are trying to think like, is this going to help advance the ball in addressing the most significant issue? And if it is, we're probably going to be more inclined to work on that. I think equity is the other really important lens that we're looking through. So those are our North Stars. We really like to make sure that when we are going to spend our resources, which are very limited, we're not an AG's office that has a scientist on staff like some other AGs, and we're not large. I think we punch above our weight, and that's because of all the people, who tell me what to do. But I think, by and large, those are big lenses for us. And so when we are going to be exercising our enforcement discretion, so for example, Massachusetts has an innovative structure in place where we have long had an understanding, memorandum of understanding that is formalized with the Department of Environmental Protection. So our enforcement cases, we work very closely with DEP, and they are like our experts on cases. So a matter will come in, there'll be decisions made based on set criteria about whether those will get enforced, administratively or civilly, or if it's significant enough and has the kind of criteria of intent or significant harm around it, perhaps even criminally. So we work carefully with those agencies coming in, and so we're trying there to ensure that when we're going to take a big case on, it's going to be a case that's going to benefit a community that really, really needs our help. It's going to be a case that's going to really help to decrease an environmental harm that's significant. So when AG Healey is talking about asbestos cases, those cases are really important because often those are, what we're talking about with an asbestos case is really when somebody is going into, we have a lot of old housing structure in Massachusetts, somebody's going into a housing structure, they're removing asbestos improperly. It might not sound like a big deal, but it really is, because sometimes that happens when families are in those buildings, when there are children in the buildings. Sometimes it happens when there are workers there that don't have adequate protection. They may not be English speaking, and they're placed at great risk. So those are the lenses that we're using to think about our work. Now, when we're talking about our energy division, that's a docket where we don't have much discretion, right? We're going to be in there, we're going to be fighting for reasonable rates no matter what happens. We're not picking and choosing what rate case to get involved in. If there's a rate case, we're going to be there no matter how busy we are and everything else. So, some things aren't going to require a lot of discretion. We also, honestly, we're looking for things that give us an opportunity to make a big change. So when we had 2 huge greenfield gas pipelines proposed for Massachusetts, the other thing that I think about our office is that we are making very data-driven decisions. So we really wanted to understand, is that going to be a good deal for ratepayers? We had independent experts look at that and reach a decision that it would not be. And then that really helps us to advocate from the standpoint of ratepayers. Why would we allow ratepayers to shoulder the risk or the burden for those projects when it's bad from a climate standpoint? It's going to cost more than alternatives that aren't reliant on fossil fuel, and it will lock us into fossil fuel infrastructure for the next several decades. So, that hopefully gives you some sense of sort of the screens that we're running these things through.
Yeah, I think that's, really helpful, Melissa. I would just add that, Elizabeth, on the affirmative side, now people obviously are pretty familiar with our lawsuit against Exxon, which, we've successfully maintained. And the story has just gotten worse and worse for them. That's an example of wanting to bring attention to a serious issue and, a case that got a lot of attention and has allowed us to talk about a lot of things related to this. There's work that goes on, though, every day in the Commonwealth. And for me, one of the exciting things I get to do is go out and visit some of our brownfields site. Betsy Harper and our team oversees the brownfields program, where, this is a win-win for communities where there's been a cleanup and properties are put back into constructive use. It's great for the municipalities, it's great for the community, and it's good for the environment. And, that's affirmative work that we're looking to do. I really credit Melissa, because I don't think you've ever seen an office use opportunities like the one we used, where we secured funding from the Bar Foundation, retained experts, and put out that report a few years ago just to offer the data on why we thought we knew it was legally wrong for electric ratepayers to shoulder the burden of any new gas pipeline structure. But it was more than that. It was about showing, well, is there really a need for this or not? What does this really mean? And, it's been that kind of innovation and that kind of forward-looking thinking from the Bureau that I think has been helpful and has also very much informed, I think, policy and actions and even legislation, out of the state.
Yeah. Good question. Shifting gears for a moment to water. The Trump administration is attempting to undo fundamental parts of the 1972 Clean Water Act, including repealing the 2015 Clean Water Rule. And there is no valid scientific or legal support for this, that I can see. For those listening, this is just a pretty basic safeguard that helps states and federal agencies protect our rivers, streams, wetlands. Dismantling it threatens the drinking water supply for about 1 in 3 Americans. I think it's 117 million of us. Attorney General, you and other AGs have been mobilizing. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this is sometimes referred to as WOTUS. I think that the waters of the United States, it is, as you say, Elizabeth, it's a no-brainer. It's been the law for a long time now. It makes so much sense. And of course, because it makes so much sense, the Trump administration is looking to undo it. So we've sued. We're seeking a preliminary injunction to stop that from happening, joining with other states. And, you know, if this were to happen, it would only make it harder for Massachusetts and states like Massachusetts to protect our right to clean water. As you mentioned, the numbers are staggering. And I'll just also say that taking away these protections will impact, I think, more than half of the country's wetlands, hundreds of thousands of streams. It's also going to incentivize polluters to relocate, you know, to states with less stringent protections. And, you know, our destinies are so tied together. We can somewhere, you know, we're going to suffer here in Massachusetts as well. And so that's sort of the general points on this. Melissa, I don't know if you want to add anything specific to the litigation.
No, that covers it. I think that covers it very nicely. I would say, you know, since 2017, I don't want to leave everybody feeling hopeless. We've had actually a lot of early victories in these rollback cases. And one of the reasons why is it turns out the Department of Justice is pretty terrible at doing these rollbacks. So they've made a number of very sort of fundamental administrative law errors in advancing them. So that's the good news. And, you know, sort of a companion issue that's been happening with the WOTUS rule is this question of, I'm a company, I'm discharging polluted water, it goes into the groundwater, and then it reaches a jurisdictional water like a river. So does the Clean Water Act prevent me from discharging that pollution to the groundwater? Well, obviously the common sense answer is that it should. And the Trump administration has taken the position, obviously, that it shouldn't. So this issue's come up in a number of cases, and you probably have seen that there was a big decision out of the Maui case just a couple of weeks ago that basically found that these indirect discharges, if you will, are regulated under the Clean Water Act, and that was a United States Supreme Court decision, and we filed an amicus brief in that matter. So there have been a number of really bright moments, and maybe we'll have a moment to talk about them, and that's one of them. And I think when, you know, we get this in front of a court and the court looks at the science, Elizabeth, as you mentioned on the WOTUS rule, I mean, just think about it. This is not difficult, right? There's Merrimack River, for example. We all know it's coming down from New Hampshire. What this basically means is you could be an entity in New Hampshire and you're discharging your pollutants into the water in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire has a different view of, you know, sort of the level of protection that should be afforded to natural resources. But the river doesn't stop at the border between New Hampshire and Massachusetts. It comes into Massachusetts, and that has an impact on us. So that's why it's so important to fight this one, even though Massachusetts has been, you know, really incredibly insightful and had a lot of foresight about how to protect these resources in our state law. It's still going to matter to us.
Great. I had a question about air. I mean, right at this intersection of climate and equity, we have tailpipe pollution. And we've heard a lot about vehicle emission standards. This has been, you know, something that Trump has been trying to roll back, and so successfully, frankly, since he was campaigning. Transportation is the single largest share of emissions in the Commonwealth, in the 44% or so. And we're seeing these direct connections between particulate emissions and human health through this COVID-19 crisis. I mean, Attorney General, you were in Chelsea and East Boston just a couple of days ago. I mean, you're living this. Curbing tailpipe emissions is just essentially, I mean, it is fundamental to hitting our climate goals. What does an affirmative agenda look like for you guys on transportation pollution in the middle of the Trump administration?
Well, I recently announced that we're going to sue EPA again for rolling back federal clean car standards that would improve air quality and save drivers tens of billions of dollars at the pump, incidentally. We sued in November over EPA's plan to stop California and Massachusetts from making stronger emission standards for cars and trucks. And, one of the arguments that we make is that, again, they do these things without legitimate scientific, economic, or environmental justification whatsoever. And so, this is also involved partnering with other states to fight back this dangerous rollback attempt. That's where we're going to take this. I think that from the time that Pruitt came in, we've been talking about particulate matter, and we were in this fight long before Scott Pruitt's terrible reign. We sued the EPA back in 2017 for failure to address some harmful ground level ozone, smog, and we're still in court trying to force the EPA to do its job and protect downwind states like Massachusetts. So, we know, and God, we know now. You see COVID, and you see, disproportionately, again, this was part of our EJ brief yesterday, communities with worse air pollution, higher rates of asthma, and other respiratory illnesses are all the more vulnerable. Protective air quality standards save lives.
You have said very movingly, Attorney General, that racial discrimination is a threat to public health. And I think we're seeing that now. I have so many questions for you, but I really just have time for about one more before we pivot to the audience Q&A, and they're flying in. So, so a question just about how you're thinking about recovery. I mean, I imagine that there will be a world post-COVID, and that now is the time that we lay the foundation for the future that we want, and we build back better.
Yeah, look,
yeah,
I totally agree. And I think that this is the time to things in a whole new way, whether you're talking about ways that we vote, ways that we access healthcare, ways that we work, that we move people and things. I think that we need a green recovery. I think that that's what we want to seize here. Massachusetts should lead the charge when it comes to the green recovery, because we know some of the solutions that we need to really realize. It isn't just about emissions reduction, as important as that is. It's important that we build the wind farms. It's important, that we change how we do. You got to think more broadly, and I mean a collective we. And the mentality's got to be, thinking about everything from how we grow our food to how we heat our homes, because we know, there are ways that we can change things and do things that will make a lot of sense, that will protect ourselves as the effects of climate change grow stronger, while we work to keep the federal government and the fossil fuel industry from further efforts to wreck our planet. So, this is some of what I see. I'm already having conversations with other states. I have to tell you, there's a really enlivened engagement on the part of many state AGs, and certainly many that Melissa and I work with. And that's a good thing. I think we should lead regionally. I think we should lead from the state level. And I think that Massachusetts should be in the lead as we move forward and build anew from this pandemic.
Okay. So I'm going to pivot, Attorney General and Melissa, to the audience Q&A. You have a really engaged crew here watching from home. Lots of questions about Weymouth, so we're going to start there. The topic of the Weymouth compressor station is, I think there's 5 or so questions. I know you've opposed the Weymouth compressor station, and a study that you released in 2015 found that increased gas capacity is not needed, as you mentioned, for Massachusetts electric reliability needs through 2030. And that data and that study has been used by activists to fight against the construction. So while your office doesn't have a clear way to weigh in here, one viewer writes, quote, "Are there any efforts to strengthen Massachusetts regulations and enforcement to be better protective of public health in light of the compressor station?" What would you say to that?
I'd say that absolutely, there are ways to strengthen that. I think, you can look to the Weymouth experience as an example of why perhaps there's a greater need to focus on things at the outset. I point to what's happening right now in Chelsea and East Boston. I mean, the siting of the proposed siting of the substation there by Eversource raises a host of issues for the community. So I know that we need to do a better job as a state in recognizing impacts and recognizing public health impacts. Certainly, I think that there are necessary things needed for our energy infrastructure, but we've got to find the most optimal way to achieve that. And it's not just about the dollar bottom line. Included in that has to be an accounting of public and effects on the environment. And I don't know, Melissa, if you have anything to add more to the viewer's question on that.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I think there's a lot of opportunity here. In fact, as we were waiting for today's webinar to begin, Elizabeth and I were talking a little bit about this, and we do have a moment now. We saw, it was actually very remarkable and heartening to see the response to our report that went out yesterday. And I think it's hard to look at the situation and not have your heart touched, right? We see what's happening right now, and nobody thinks that's okay in the United States of America or in Massachusetts, right? It's not okay. So we have a moment to do something about it. And we have an incredible group of people who don't normally have much contact with each other, talking with each other about it. Whether that's the Green Ribbon Commission or mayors or all of the civil rights organizations who supported it, or the number of environmental NGOs, including ELM, who offered supportive statements for that work. So I think what that tells our office is that there's a moment here, there's interest, people want to do something about it, and yes, that's part of the problem. The reason why we're in this place is because it is sort of the logical outcome of, not intentional, but it's the logical outcome of many years of policy that have led us here. And so if we can create the policy, we can uncreate it and we can make something different. One thing is leveling the playing field. If you're going to be participating before the Energy Facility Siting Board or something, you got to come up with your own legal fees for that. Right out of the box, that's a very significant barrier for a person or a group of residents to overcome. That's just going to make it non-starter from the very get-go for many people. So that needs to change. And then, our regulatory structures don't really require us to think about synergistic impacts of pollutants or cumulative impacts of pollutants. So we need to be doing that. We really need to be doing that. And we need to make sure that offices like ours and really anybody who is going to be talking about this policy, we've got to be partnering with people in those communities, right from the get-go, and they need to lead the way and we need to help them get there. And I think that's a different frame from kind of how it's been done in the past. And if those voices aren't part of the solution, then there's a really good chance the solution's not going to be a very good fit. So I think one of the conversations we're having is how can we create a different process to sort of get us to the endpoint that the viewer's asking about. So it's sort of a substantive endpoint and then a different process to get there.
And so on the topic of policy, there are several climate-related bills currently kicking around Beacon Hill. Which ones are the most promising or your priorities?
Gosh, there are so many. What do you think, Melissa, from where you and Rebecca sit in terms of, let's talk about priorities?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think that the key priority for the Commonwealth is to figure out a way that we're going to put an equitable plan in place to really get to some of these more aspirational goals about emissions reductions. So if we really want to be hitting this, 100% renewable energy, 100% clean, full decarbonization by 2050, those are great goals. And we are ahead of the game, right? Because of things like RGGI and other Green Communities Act and Global Warming Solutions Act and other measures that have been put in place by the legislature. But now is the time. We're out of time, right? This is not, a moment where we have like another decade to figure this out. So respectfully, I think, when we think about what's kind of pending right now, it needs to be bolder. It needs to be really thinking about how, and not just talking more, but really doing something on transportation emissions reduction, putting our money where our mouth is a little bit on how that's going to happen, and really thinking more broadly about how we're going to get to this level of emissions reduction, because it's not just going to happen without some significant change. to incentivize that transition. And right now we've focused a lot on the power sector, and that's a very reasonable place to focus. It's a very sensible place because it's sort of easy. You know, it's easy to write an air permit that's going to require certain emissions reductions. It's easy to put a trading system in place because we already have that regulatory authority. But now we gotta move out. Mobile sources are tougher. And I think, Elizabeth, one thing I think about, you know, you were mentioning the significant greenhouse gas emissions impact. Well, you know, tailpipe emissions are responsible for half of the nitrogen oxide emissions in the country. That's a lot. And that matters because when that interacts with VOCs in the atmosphere, it creates ground level ozone. So, you know, many of you might have children, or maybe yourselves, you have asthma. You know, these are things that really, again, come back to public health. And so when we're thinking about why to do it, it's not just that climate frame about something that may happen 20 years from now. It's about right now. It's about economic opportunity. I forget these data, and if we had Stephanie Pollock here, she could tell us. But you know, the percentage of household income that's spent on transportation in the Commonwealth is huge. It's huge. So there's an economic justice impact to this as well. Rosie Bongiovanni was saying yesterday during our release of the report that right now there's not enough buses in Chelsea because the 111, I guess, is the primary bus there, and it's often very packed. And now with social distancing, it's a heightened risk to be taking that bus. So there are a whole host of reasons why we should be focusing on transportation, and it's really time. I can tell you, and I know this is true for ELM and many of the other organizations that do such great work in this space, but this has been a conversation that's been happening for a very, very long time in the Commonwealth, and now it's time to actually do something. So I think that's where I would prioritize, and on the building sector as well in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So, Attorney General, you mentioned offshore wind a few moments ago. Offshore wind is close to ELM's heart. The first projects selected by the state have been awaiting permits from the U.S. Department of Interior for almost a year. You know, this local renewable energy is crucial to meeting our state level emissions reduction mandates. And offshore wind is a great way to get people back to work again. Are there legal tools that you can deploy to compel the Department of Interior to move more quickly on offshore wind?
You know, this has been an incredibly frustrating scenario. And again, to my mind, an example of the Trump administration just playing games, plain and simple. We're a little bit of it at a disadvantage here legally, I think, in terms of what we can do. Although it does remind me of what Wilbur Ross tried to do with the census. We took that on and kept him from putting that citizenship question on the census, which was just another way to ensure that town came out a certain way. I believe, and this is just my personal view, that there are games that have been played, of course, and that, you know, this is about further aggrandizing the fossil fuel industry, sticking it to places like Massachusetts, as the Trump administration has stuck it to their blue East Coast states. You know, we're in conversation with the governor. I know he's tried. I think it's an incredibly important issue for all the reasons that ELM has put for it. It makes sense on so many levels. So I think we should talk more about that because it's the now. It's not just the future. It's the now. And what I've said for a long time too is that, you know, in a very provincial, I didn't want Massachusetts to lose out to the efforts of other states, our sister states, that have really doubled down on some of these investments. And you know, again, I'm of the view I want Massachusetts to lead and be out there. And you know, I spent a lot of time with Mayor Mitchell and others, you know, talking through this very point. And I think, as Melissa says, you know, whether it's on transportation infrastructure, which I agree with her, I think that that's where we need to really focus. Coming out of this pandemic, you know, you saw Jim Rooney in the Greater Boston Chamber's report on transportation, what needs to happen. I don't know how people are going to go back to work, what that's going to look like, but it seems to me this only further underscores we have an opportunity right now to change the way we think about transportation and infrastructure. There's not going to be a lot of money, but that's sort of like, what are we getting from the federal government in terms of stimulus? How can we most strategically utilize that? Because you know, this is a great opportunity to advance some of what we've been talking about.
To your point about prioritizing, Attorney General, there have been a few questions here that relate to how do you prioritize or triage among the countless issues that you could pursue. And so could you just speak a little bit to how you balance challenging the Trump administration while also trying to take on state issues?
Well, there are state issues. I mean, I've said for a long time, you know, when you talk about our suing the Trump administration over its attempted rollbacks, it's also about, in addition to addressing the climate crisis, it's also about protecting Massachusetts' clean energy economy, which is growing at a clip of, you know, we're well over 100,000 jobs. We need to support that economy as well. So, you know, generally, whenever you see me suing, it's because the interests of Massachusetts residents, our businesses, our economy, our health are at stake. Unfortunately, the administration's given us ample opportunity to sue because what they are doing directly impacts the health and well-being of people in Massachusetts. So that's why we sue when we sue. In terms of triaging things, you know, again, I think it goes back to the nimbleness of our team. We've got people who are working in divisions from civil rights to consumer protection to energy to environmental protection, you know, to healthcare to antitrust. We have a lot of division collaboration. I think that's been why we've been able to move quickly and nimbly on any number of things. But I'm proud of the fact that, you know, while we've had our success rate in suing the Trump administration is over 100%, which I think really a credit to the lawyers and the team in the office. But we've also had record revenues, you know, returned for the state over the last 6 years. And we've done some really important work on a lot of fronts that, you know, aren't related to what's going on with the Trump administration. And obviously as an office, we've got to do both. It's why we made sure that we went virtual as an office before anybody. I mean, 8 weeks ago, we've been virtual, 600 employees. Still, you know, fair labor issues or civil rights issues or consumer issues or people who have got student loans or debt collectors coming after them. And it's, you know, we've got to be able to do both. And, you know, fortunately, we've got a team of incredibly dedicated public servants who have just totally stepped up and risen to the occasion. So my job's easy because I want to do everything. And we just, you know, find the right people in the office to do it, work in collaboration sometimes with other AG's offices, you know, and it gets done. Work with wonderful NGO partners like ELM. That's how we do it.
All right. Well, we've got time for just a couple of quick ones here. You mentioned the work related to ExxonMobil. Late 2019, you were the second AG to sue ExxonMobil over deceptive practices after what was quite a lengthy investigation. So one viewer writes, where does the action on ExxonMobil stand? And given what you're able to share, where are we?
Yeah. You know, I'm going to let Melissa speak to that. I will say I am proud of the work that our team put in. We took time to develop a case. The complaint is very, very detailed. We sought information from sources other than Exxon because to this day, Exxon still has refused to produce documents. But that just led us to go to the banks and the investment banks and, you know, the gas stations and other places to build that really what I think is a terrific complaint. So of where we stand, they tried to remove the case to federal court. Melissa did a terrific argument, virtual, one of the few virtual ones early on a few weeks ago. And Judge Young essentially, you know, broomed that out right at argument and sided with Melissa in our office. So it's back in state court. We're awaiting, well, tell me, Melissa, a motion to dismiss?
Yep. That's really it. The only footnote I would add is if you are interested in the case, all of the pleadings are online at the Attorney General's office website.
All right. So we've got one more question. I think this is an appropriate one to close this out on. So many people watching are wondering, like, I'm at home, how can I help? What can I do? People are asking, how can they fight against the Trump administration's rollbacks? and organizations asking, what kinds of action alerts are actually helpful. Can you recommend ways that individuals can have an influence on the federal level these days?
Yeah, well, I think that responding to action alerts, getting involved with the great work that organizations like ELM are doing are really key. So make sure that you're doing that and following ELM's direction. I think that it really matters who, this is sort of an obvious point, elections matter. And at the local, state level, we know they matter, and they certainly matter at the federal level. I think that for people in Massachusetts, get involved, be part of organizing, be part of efforts to make sure that you have the right people in positions of power, of policy making, who are going to do right by your values and what you want to see happen. And I can't underscore that enough. I think also to find ways to broaden the discussion. You got Zoom calls going on, talk to neighbors, keep this dialogue going. We saw people, right? Amazing work by the young people and an energy, injected into the environmental movement. Let's seize that and continue to talk about things. I think it's helpful to talk about things tying the environment directly to humanity, right? And there's no better illustration of that right now probably than COVID-19. It ties directly to our economy, and that's why I actually enjoyed, the conversations that I've had with the business community of us, where we found commonality in terms of goals and ways to do things. So, I would do that. Vote for leaders that make the priority. Get involved in that work. Continue to make your voices heard to friends and community. I don't. Your federal delegation is terrific. They don't as much need to be told, what to do. There are other people in other districts that need to be told what to do, and some of them need to be office so that they're not continuing to sit on the sidelines or do harm. But I think that the opportunity, and there's no better group to lead the effort than ELM.
All right. Well, thanks for that plug. We are at time, so I want to thank you, Attorney General and Melissa Hoffer.
Welcome.
The chat and the Q&A are actually full of messages of thanks and gratitude to you, so please do read through them. I know I personally will be continuing to follow you closely over the weeks and months to come. The Trump administration is going to be on a tear through those regulations in these final months of what is hopefully his last term. So the planet and humanity need you more than ever. For those that are listening, if you don't follow Maura on Twitter, please consider it. She is delightful, timely, empathetic, sometimes quite funny. So please, at MassAGO is worth a follow. So thank you all for joining us. I want to also extend my thanks to Biogen, whose generous support makes this series possible. So look out for an email from the ELM team with links to the recording of this session and to the registration link for next week's webinar with transportation expert Monica Tibbetts-Net. So be well, take good care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again, Attorney General.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody.